Welcome to the Babylonian Podcast. I'm Michael Light, and I'm a Second Temple Jewish literature junkie and a big-time Bible nerd. And on this podcast, I provide the perspective of Jews that lived just before Jesus, from texts that we have like the apocrypha, pseudepigraphon, Dead Sea Scrolls, Philo, and more. With scholars, sages, and scriptures, let's Bible on. Welcome back to another episode of the Babylonian. For those of you who have been with us for these past couple of weeks, we have been going through a series on the apocryphal literature. So if you haven't been, then make sure to go back and check out all the other episodes of this season on all the other apocrypha. And also make sure to check out other parts of the podcast, such as the Searching the Scriptures one, especially episode 2, where I talk about the canonicity of the apocrypha. Also know that all these resources, as well as notes and Bible references in the apocrypha that are being updated as I read it, as well as overviews of all the major apocrypha, can be found on my website, michaeljlight.com or thebabylonian.com. This link is also found in the show notes. You go to Works and Writings, click on Apocrypha, and you can see it all there. But yeah, anyways, without any further ado, we're going to be jumping into one of the shortest Apocrypha. And the title of it is the letter or the Epistle of Jeremiah. Now, in some Bibles, or some Apocrypha, rather, the Epistle of Jeremiah is just chapter 6 of Baruch, because I believe it was the Latin Vulgate that did this. But later on, actually centuries after it, the church and the Jesus movement, this work was seen as an extension of Baruch. And I already have an episode on Baruch. This is the most previous one. And remember, Baruch, son of Neriah, is the scribe of Jeremiah, found in Jeremiah chapter, I think, 36. And so the Epistle of Jeremiah is often connected to Baruch because it's also a pseudepigrapha. That is a text that is pseudonymously written, as if it was one of the major biblical characters, this one being Jeremiah. And so it's often seen as a letter that went with the letter of Baruch. But if you read the two, they have two completely different main ideas, main concepts. For starters, Baruch is about exile and how God needs to come and to end exile by transforming Israel's heart, and Israel needs to repent and change their ways. And the letter of Jeremiah is about exilic Israelites needing to turn away from idolatry, but it's more of a polemic. That is kind of a piece on the pointlessness of idolatry. In fact, some scholars say that the way that the letter of Jeremiah is written is actually written as a homily or a sermon, and not so much as just a letter. Also, Baruch may be composite literature. That means that it would be multiple different pieces that were later seamed together, put together with seams, and the letter of Jeremiah may be seen as something that could later be added on, but it doesn't really add to the overall message of Baruch. It's connected somewhat in its ideas, but not much more than a lot of the other apocrypha that also talk about exile. And so you can also see the summary of Baruch in my works and writings on the apocrypha. If you just scroll down and click Baruch, and you'll see that the Epistle of Jeremiah just doesn't have a place there. Also, if you're wondering, I'm not, at least at this moment, I'm not doing a summary of the letter of Jeremiah, just because there are lesser and there are greater apocrypha. And I have written on some of the maybe less important apocrypha, but they were at least more interesting and seem to be more important. And a lot of the letter in Jeremiah can be found in other stuff. It's a shorter one, and just with everything that's going on, I'm seeing it as less of a priority. So maybe I'll go back and write a summary like I have for the other ones. But until now, I will leave this podcast in the section on the Apocrypha of my website, along with Esther, and then later the additions to Daniel that we're going to be looking at in the coming weeks, as well as the prayer of Manasseh and Psalm 151, which I will touch on towards the end of this season. But if you're wondering, that's why I'm not writing a summary, and so this isn't really based on... I'm not really referring to those notes. So the letter of Jeremiah is actually one chapter, the whole thing from beginning to end. In total, it's 73 verses. So to be fair, it's about the size of 2 or 3 Bible chapters, but regular Bible chapters. But nonetheless, the letter of Jeremiah, as I said earlier, is written with exiles in mind, as are all the Apocrypha. And it's kind of speaking to the exiles feeling the need to, or being convinced or persuaded by idols. Matthew Goff, the person who annotates the letter of Jeremiah and provides an introduction in the Oxford Annotated Apocrypha, says that it may be kind of expanding specifically on the beginning of Jeremiah chapter 10. And this is what Jeremiah chapter 10 says. It says, "Hear the word that the Lord speaks to you, O house of Israel. Thus says the Lord, do not learn the way of the nations, or be dismayed at the signs of the heavens, for the nations are dismayed at them. For the customs of the peoples are false. A tree from the forest is cut down and worked with an axe by the hands of an artisan. They deck it with silver and gold. They fasten it with hammers and nails, so that it cannot move. Their idols are like scarecrows in a cucumber field, and they cannot speak. They have to be carried, for they cannot walk. Do not be afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, nor is it in them to do good. There is none like you, O Lord. You are great. You are great, and your name is great in might. Who would not fear you, O King of the nations? For that is your due. Among all the wise ones of the nations, and in all their kingdoms, there is none like you. They are both stupid and foolish. The instruction given by idols is no better than wood. Beaten silver is brought from Tarshish, and gold from Uphaz. They are the work of the artisan and of the hands of the goldsmith. Their clothing is blue and purple. They are all the product of skilled workers. But the Lord is the true God. He is the living God and the everlasting King. At his wrath the earth quakes, and the nations cannot endure his indignation. Thus shall you say to them, the gods who did not make the heavens and the earth shall perish from the earth and from under the heavens. So that's Jeremiah 10. As you can see, it's polemic. It's a polemic against idols and their worthlessness and how they can't move or really do anything. They're just straight up materials. And this is this same idea is also found in Isaiah 44, 9 through 20, Psalm 115, 3 through 8, 135, 15 through 18. It's found in the Wisdom of Solomon, and I believe some other little parts of apocrypha and possibly pseudepigraphon. And so it's very much close to that part of Jeremiah. And you can also see why this author wanted to connect his writing to Jeremiah, or write as if he was Jeremiah. Remember that Jeremiah is the weeping prophet who prophesied in and outside of exile. So he was the first person to kind of speak to the exiles. And so he writes as if this was given by a biblical prophet to the first exiles who must have been struggling with the same thing as him. And so the letter of Jeremiah opens and says that a copy of a letter that Jeremiah sent to those who were to be taken to Babylon as exiles by the king of the Babylonians to give them the message that God had commanded them. And then it goes in. And, throughout the letter, there are tons of scriptural references, actually. But the whole thing is arguing, it's almost all arguing about the worthlessness of idols, how they can't even help themselves. They're made by other people, but they can't help themselves. They're useless. They have no life. They're powerless. And that people show themselves to be fools when they praise these idols that are even less powerful than the humans that are praising them. They're just the works of human hands, and they're impotent and helpless and useless. Those are a lot of the different subheadings that Matthew Goff gives in his annotations of this. But yeah, it's not that long of a work. If you're interested in what it has to say, I would say just go ahead and read it. While I would definitely recommend reading other apocrypha before this, this is a shorter one. It's very close, again, as I said, to a lot of the earlier biblical texts, and probably one of the things I would say novel, but it is also found in other things, is that it references gifts being placed before the idols just as they are placed before the dead. In verse 27, it says, "Gifts are placed before these idols just as they're placed before the dead." Now, I don't say this is novel because it's also found in Tobit and Sirah, this reference of laying out food or gifts in front of the dead, possibly with the idea that these people dead people could come and eat it, and that you could feed dead people. So that's just something that's interesting from it. But yeah, the overview is pretty much idols are helpless and worthless. It's kind of an apologetic argument, not necessarily for Judaism, but against the idolatry of the nations that the exiles would be amongst. And that is the Epistle of Jeremiah. Next week, we will be jumping into some more apocrypha. And so thank you for listening. Make sure to give this podcast a good review, and subscribe or follow this podcast and get notified for every new one. And I will see you next week in Babylonia.